Hello there, and welcome back to Roz Night Squeeze the Quo. I am Roz, and thank you for coming back. I just want to give a shout out now to my 5 subscribers, and I am blown away. When I originally started getting ready for this video, I did some taping yesterday. I had 3, and I was going to make it a special episode and do a trifecta with commentary, videos, and papers. And I'm still going to do the trifecta. And this time, now that I have 5, I'm so amazed. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell. So this video I'm doing with the commentary, the videos, and the papers as well. Just a little bit though, just to highlight certain points when we go over the videos. This is part 2 from the Ann Burgess, David, Gary Brucato on the Surviving the Survivor. Let me just pull that up real quick so you can take a look if you haven't watched it. It is a very good video. And at the time when I did the first, I can't even spell, Surviving Survivor, Legendary. So let's just hit this real quick.
In for a treat. We've got
there you go. So at the time, I just focused on these 2. He does research on mass murders, which he says in that video that because it's 3 or more, it's considered a mass murder, and that he and his colleagues from the University of Columbia have the only mass murder database known in this country at this time. Prior, it was the FBI that was in charge of that, which he is a former FBI agent. He came in last minute per the host. So when he gave his background information, it wasn't much because he just came on the show at the last moment. And he also, this host brings up another former FBI agent. He was a Navy SEAL as well, and he put in his 2 cents in as well during this video. So the part 2 of this is going to be focusing on the FBI and mostly the former FBI agents that go on news to talk about this case. And we'll start with this one. This is Jennifer Cofferdaffer. And before I go any further, this video, fair use, warning with explicit language, and I'm the type of person where I will give my opinion, and I will also tell you where my opinions come from, which is why in the beginning of my videos I focused on these papers, because if I'm going to be versed in something, I want to be able to back myself up on giving my opinion of why. So I'm going to warn you, I'm going to be opinionated, and at the same time, I've been told my whole life that I've had a smart mouth and I'm snarky and a little sassy, aka I've got an attitude, which I'm going to be doing that. So if you're not into the snarky or to the sassy, this may not be for you. I'm not just going to be putting it on. I'm not going to come out right off the bat being snarky or sassy, but I may be. I'm just warning you, I may be a little snarky and sassy. And I just want to give a little insight of why I'm into this case. As I mentioned in my other videos, I went to school for take my master's in criminal justice, mostly on victims. And I really looked in towards human and sex trafficking because where I worked at the time that inspired me to go back to school, there was a lot of sex trafficking going on with the residents that lived there, and these were juveniles, these were kids, and no one was really doing anything. I don't know if they weren't doing really anything because they weren't versed, or I'm sure there's a plethora of reasons why, but being my snarky, sassy self, I went back to school. Now, the reason why this case means as much as me starting this YouTube on doing papers that, by the way, the ones with the just the 3 papers that I did. I see that 3 people watched it. So thank you for that. Thank you for watching. I'm sure you didn't get through all of it. It's a lot. It's dry. It's long. And I try to make it as light and fun as possible, but it is a heavy subject. So it's not going to be easy. And it's not easy learning about these crimes that happen of this nature. And as I was saying, I'm focusing on the former FBI agent and Steve. And the reason I'm doing that is because I've noticed there is a dynamic between Steve and the former FBI agents that go on these shows to talk. So that's why I'm picking this part 2 to be that. Former FBI agents on what they say about him and how they feel about how he's handling his daughter's slaying, and how he's being a little maybe too involved by getting his own private investigator and getting his own lawyer. So they definitely will hear those former FBI agents say that. But you're also going to hear some former FBI agents that sound very well versed, and they are definitely seasoned. They know what they're talking about. They understand the concept, and they give their insight about it. And then you're going to get others that you can tell that could use my video on the 3 papers that I did, which will do those again, just looking over them. So it was the sexual homicide, untangling sexual homicide. We'll hit on that a little bit, not really much though. And the sexual homicide versus non-sexual homicide, and stranger. We'll also go into the stalking a little bit, because if you recall, when this first broke out, the talking of a stalker, which we'll get into that on November 19th. So I will be showing you former FBI agents speaking about this case from November 19th to November 23rd, because that's when in my research and what I remember, this is when the family speaks out. This is Steve, Olivia, and her brother. I forgot his name, and I apologize for that. They come out and speak about how they are not happy with how law enforcement is handling this investigation. And you will hear other FBI agents agree as well. So this is part 2 with legendary mine hunter, which is this woman, Ann Burgess, and Gary Brucato, and I am doing a comparison, and you make your own decision as usual. You use your brain. It's yours. You're in control of it, and it's your responsibility to use it. And I'm going to be giving my opinions, my own commentary on what these former FBI agents say, because they bring up stalking, they bring up homicide. And in the beginning, when this case happened on November 13th, there was a lot of FBI agents already there. And, there's content creators trying to figure out, why they were there. What was the reason for them to be there already? And some people believe that there was probably some type of investigation going on, which could be very well true. But as I started doing those papers and looking into this aspect of the former FBI, I'm thinking there may have been a sexual element to this case as a sexual homicide, because if you remember with those papers, and I'll show up later when it comes through in their interviews, with those papers, they use the FBI's criteria of what constitutes a sexual homicide. They set the tone of what constitutes sexual homicide. The FBI does. And also with those papers, they use a lot of the NVDRS, which is which is the CDC, and that's a great resource to use for any type of information. So I went on here, I looked up Idaho, and you hit it, and it takes you right to their health and welfare website. And there's information there, just information on Medicaid, public health information, and any person who lives here in the U.S. you should be versed in what you have that you could use if something happens, or the resources that are needed if there's something going on with you or anyone you know. These websites are good to have, to get phone numbers, to reach out to someone if anything of these natures that you notice are happening to you and no one's listening to you. It's unfortunate it happens. We went through the Lauren case at the University of Utah because she reached out to every person that she was supposed to and no one did anything. You have all these people being paid at the university and within the university domain. They have jobs to do and no one did anything. So what are you getting paid for? Why are you getting this grant money? You get the grant money, Title IX, for these situations to keep your students safe. And I just want to go in why I am into this case is because of these students. They're young, 20 and 21. And we hear how Kaylee is a hustler. Kaylee, she's a worker. She's got a work ethic. And like Steve says in Chronicles of Olivia, which we will go into that as well. And that interview was 2 days before Brian Koberger got arrested. That was interviewed on 12/28/22, and she posted it on YouTube on January 13th, 2023. So you learn. The more I learned about them, the more that I realized that these were amazing people. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. They were amazing people. And like Steve said, we didn't care about the celebrations. We just cared about doing what you need to do, learn what you need to do, grow, and keep accomplishing. And she did. She did that. And I have respect for any woman who does that. And I love that she shows her body. She is proud of her body, her curves. She is not hesitant about it. She lets it out. And you know why she's able to do that? Because she's got a supportive father. Her father lets her be her, let her go out and be a woman. That's a man, in my opinion. That's a definition of a man who lets his daughter be who she is and doesn't hold her back. And at the same time, instill safety with her as well, because he knows what she looks like. He knows. He's not a dummy. He even says they're very pretty girls. They're going to get attention. Because of that, you need to be careful. So he respected her. He respects his daughters. He respects his wife. That's a man, in my opinion. And with Maddie, she's beautiful. They were both on the dean's list. And Maddie's a little bit on the... I don't know much about her, which I would love to know more about her. But I have respect for any female who's in a sorority, the both of them, and they realize it's not working anymore and gets out. I was not in a sorority. I did more sports. I was more of a sport girl. I went to college and played a sport. Sorority was brought to my attention, but I'm like, well, I can't do that. I'm in sports. They're like, oh no, you can do both. I was like, heck no, that takes up way too much time. And then I learned that you had to pay dues and you had to be really invested in it. And to me, that sounded more like a headache than anything else. That's just I'll stick to my sports. I'll stick to my sports and my papers. And I respect any female who has her own brain. And they kind of give me they are not about the status quo. They're about them and living their life to the best of their ability while being kind and good people. Were they mean girls at times? Sure, who isn't? But for the majority, and this is why I feel a lot of people are into this case, but you can tell that they are amazing people. Their parents grew them up to be amazing people. Xana, same thing. She's a sports girl. You see her TikToks. She's got an amazing personality. And when I see people, and Ethan, I saw an interview with his mom saying how he was just really athletic. I mean, the academics was not a strong suit, which is fine, but you can tell with his videos how he sang. He was passionate about country music. He loved life. These people loved life, and they didn't let anyone get in their way to do what they wanted to do. And when I see good people get taken advantage of and get their life taken away, boils my blood. I can relate to that. I can relate to marching to the own beat of your own drum, and you live your life, and when you do that, you have people who try to stop you along the way. They'll do anything they can to try to stop you. I know what that's like. And it sounds like they were way too bright for this world. Way too bright. So, moving on. Let's get back to business on this part 2. But first, I just want to do this. I find it interesting because if you remember, Ethan's parents came to the media first to break this case. My memory is November 14th. I could be wrong. But when you look at the timestamps, and I rely on these timestamps because when you see the news on here, they don't put the times here on the actual screen. Most of them don't. So I go by here. So this says November 16th. That's when Moscow Police Department came out with their press release. They came out sooner. And I want to say when I checked earlier, this one is the one that still has it.
How you guys are doing.
I mean, what a choice of person to put on there to do the interview. And they have November 15th. So I could be wrong, but I want to say it was the 14th. Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, notification. You know the deal. So what we're going to do as well is we're going to go through MPD because now I've checked their press releases on their website, and they now have their own, King Road has their own category here. And they have all the new releases. So what bothers me about this is it's not in order. So I don't know if that's their program that does that, but that's something you should check. I mean, 12, 15, 7, 8, 19, 13, 6. It's all over the place. That should not be going on. And then here they have their YouTube, their releases. So they come out on the 16th. And then they do little interviews here and there, like on television. But then they only have 12/6 right here. But I want to say they did another one before then. But we're not focusing on the police. We're focusing on former FBI agents talking to the media on their insight of this crime. And it starts on November 19th. But if you would like to go back and see, they give more information here on the timestamps and the time dates of what was going on. And we'll go through that as well. So let's begin with the first. This is November 19th, News Nation, and it's Jennifer.
Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindoffer, always appreciate your insight. Thank you for being here, Jennifer.
Absolutely, Natasha.
So according to reports, one of the victims, Kaylee, spoke about having a stalker. Jennifer, what do you make of this?
Well, it's going to be a very important key in this from the standpoint that that person needs to be looked into immediately. And I have no doubt that law enforcement has already possibly identified who that is and is.
All right. So she says right there that law enforcement has already identified who that is. Now, I did a video on if Kaylee had a stalker or not, if she had a stalker, or was it a collective group, and I'll get into that further on in the future. So here we go with, it's not the 19th. This is the 20th. This comes out November 20th. Here they are talking about rumors and speculation. And maybe this is not the one. Maybe it is the 21st. Another rumor control. So let's see here. There's no suspects or no weapon. 600 tips have been received. And that's the 21st. This is the 22nd. The autopsies were conducted on the 17th. All right, so here it is, the 22nd. Investigators have looked extensively into information they received about Kaylee having a stalker. They have pursued hundreds of pieces of information related to this topic and have not been able to verify or identify a stalker. If you have information, you can go ahead and do that. Hundreds. I would love to know what those hundreds of tips were. Because if you know anything about stalking and the police, which is, do I have it up here? No, I don't. I took it off because I don't even want to touch it. There's a lot of information out there on how law enforcement handles stalking information to begin with. And we saw in Lawrence at University of Utah, no one took her seriously. They basically just brushed her off. And I have a little information here about stalking, how people are complacent. They don't care. They don't believe it. There's all these myths around it. So I would like to be interested on what those tips were. So let's go back to Jennifer.
On the track to try to figure out if they had a role in all of this.
And Kaylee also made 7 phone calls back to back to her ex-boyfriend, Jack, according to her sister. Those calls went unanswered, but how can that information help the investigation?
Well, any and all phone calls, text messages, social media avenues in terms of communication that happened just prior to that event and well in advance of this event are going to be looked at closely. Look, this has to be somebody that is familiar with them, and in my opinion, they were looking at someone specific to go after. Sadly, it would seem that he came across other people, perhaps going bed to bed, until he found the person that his...
All right, so apparently she's going on that if Kaylee had a stalker, it needs to be found out. The police have already found him. And that, sadly, the stalker must have went bed to bed looking for Kaylee. He was just fumbling around looking for Kaylee when we've been told that he was basically going in there stealthily, going through the house unnoticed.
Rage left all of these individuals deceased, sadly.
Right, and we know there are 2 other people unharmed, also a dog present at that scene. I've seen some speculation online talking about why could it be that the dog wouldn't alert the sleeping people in that household as to what was going on there. Is that just wild speculation, or could there be a piece to that person being known within that space?
Well, I think that person is possibly familiar. We know that there was no break-in. They seem to be familiar. But to
So I have to give her this, Jennifer, saying that it's a stalker that's an acquaintance, which is, it's a high statistical significance with that. But an acquaintance, I don't think, will be going from room to room. And we all had questions about the dog. If there was a stranger in that house, why didn't it start barking? Dogs bark. And I want to say that looks like one of those golden doodles or labradoodles, and they're pretty subdued in their barking, but they do bark when they are being protective.
say the dog didn't wake the other two individuals. This is 3 and 4 in the morning when people are fast and hard asleep. And apparently, from what I understand, behind closed doors. So even if the dog barked, perhaps they thought they were barking at something else. What is clear is they did.
And I'm going to interrupt here. If you guys have seen this, these 3 people, I do not like. I do not like these 3 people whatsoever.
Did not come to inspect what had happened until quite later.
Appreciate that. And can you talk more about the significance of the large knife? I know Ryan was mentioning this. A county coroner told News Nation that somebody had to be pretty angry in order to stab 4 people to death. What can we glean from that being the murder weapon, the knife being the murder weapon, and also the amount of blood that engenders? What does that mean for potential footprints in that area, even the attacker leaving their own DNA behind?
Well, the beautiful thing in terms of an investigation that this type of horrible act leaves behind what we call trace evidence. That trace evidence can be hair, can be fibers, can be carpet. It can be all of many things. And I totally agree that to have this kind of attack happen, it is likely that they would have stabbed themselves in some way, a small way, cuts and so on. We also know that there was blood splatter. And all of that is so significant, and it's going to take quite an investigation to pour through that crime scene.
I mean, even as we're talking about this, it's hard to stomach the details and to imagine how violent this was. It does seem that there are so many holes investigators need to fill still. We are 7 days out. How much harder is it to solve a murder like this as time continues to pass?
It's harder, but they're going to solve this. The biggest thing they need to find out is who was actually being targeted of the 4. You would think that there was one person being targeted and that the other 3 were there and were incidental to the person's rage that they had, because this is a homicidal, passionate rage that they had toward one of those 4.
All right, there you go. Homicidal, passionate rage. When you say passionate rage, which I have mentioned before, it's a crime of passion. It is a horrible way of saying it. It makes it almost sound acceptable, which it is not. Those types are sexual in nature.
All right, former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindoffer, thank you so much for your time.
Okay. So let's get into it with that. So here, when we were saying that, why was the FBI there? Why were they there so soon? And some of us were saying, well, maybe there's some type of, because FBI does do funding, they do, fraud and abuse, but they also do sex crimes. And here we go. Lack of a definition of most countries have adapted the criteria of the wait a minute here. I had it all set up for you guys. Here it is. So this is how, if the bodies has been found, and it is the FBI's definition to be present in order for the homicide to be considered sexual. So if it's found in a sexually explicit position, an object inserted in the body cavity, there's evidence of intercourse, substitutive sexual fantasy, sadistic sexual fantasy, mutilation, and then I was on that previous page as well for the other definitions. Which is a victim lacks attire, totally or partially, in exposing of sexual parts. Now, I didn't know this prior, but when I started rewatching the Chronicles of Livia, with Steve and his family, they both mentioned something very interesting, or it alerted my attention when they said that Ali really didn't investigate them. And their question was, did Kaylee wear anything unusual to bed that night? Because we know what she wears to bed, or the clothing. And Steven said, I know which clothes she likes to wear and what dresses she likes to wear and what shoes she likes to wear. So I would like to see what type of clothing was there or was not there. So when I heard that again, that alerted me about the clothing. And here is the other paper where they look into the FBI. The most widely accepted operationalized definition of sexual homicide in research was developed by the FBI. It suggests that a case should be considered sexual homicide if at least one of the following characteristics is evident: attempted or completed sexual intercourse, sexual interest admitted by the offender, attire or lack of attire. So attire or lack of it. So what was she wearing? What were they wearing? And that's what the family's asking. For exposure of sexual body parts, sexual positioning of the body. So we found out that Kaylee and Maddie were in a single bed together. I would be interested to know how they were placed in that bed. There's rumors going on that people said that they heard that they were lied on top of each other. Insertion, substitutive, and as we mentioned before with the coroner and with the forensics, how we saw them getting swabs and swabbing the table and the walls and the banister. I'm hoping they swabbed the victims. All of them thoroughly. Even Ethan. Because you never know. And the last one is this. This one does not use the FBI, uses something different because it's overseas. But I'm just putting this here because everyone has their own way of collecting data and using their characterizations to consider what is a sexual homicide. And this is the United Kingdom. They use the NCA Serious Crime Analysis section. And that other paper mentioned about using the CDC, which I had brought up before, the NVDRS. So she was talking about the stalker. And I just want to highlight, I went ahead and highlighted a few. And oh no. All right, so they went ahead and studied femicide. That's what they called it at this time. 586 that occurred in North Carolina during a 2-year period from the reports of medical examiners and interviews with law enforcement officers. These researchers obtained information about the circumstances surrounding homicide. So this is stalking and homicides. They found that 23% of the women were stalked prior to their death. Okay. And this procedure revealed that 76% of victims were stalked prior to their death, and that 42% of these women had not reported the stalking to the police. But other than these preliminary findings regarding incidents, very little is known about the stalker who killed their victims. That would be important. That would be important. And that is why we have to give Anne Burgess a lot of credit because she was the one that got into the minds of the actual perpetrator, not just focus on the victim and we'll just collect a little bit here and there. We need to find out, who are these perpetrators? Who are these people? And just talked about how stalkers pursue their victims. And those acts include grabbing, fondling, punching, and among a smaller number of offenders, using a weapon. Some research has found that stalkers most likely to become violent is the one who has had a sexually intimate relationship with the victim. However, the prevalence of stalkers is unknown and estimated unclear. And this was back in 1978 and 1995. So it is old. It is old hat, but definitely worth looking into. And here is another. So it's unwanted contact can be by approaching and or following the victim, maintaining surveillance, appearing in places the victim is expected, or visiting the victim's home, family, and or friends. Threats, property damage, and or physical assaults may accompany stalking. Men are more than likely to stalk than women. And they use stalking as a means of continuing to control and intimidate their partner or ex-partner. So here's the victimology topology, which is what I was really wanting to focus on here. Describes there's 3 types of stalkers. 1 is the simple obsessional, 2 is the love obsessionals, and the erotomanics. The largest group of the simple obsessionals usually has a prior relationship with victims, make more physical contact, and carry a high risk of violence. The erotomaniacs are the rarest Xenon group, usually with less contact with the victims and a lower risk of violence. There are 5 stalker types that are not mutually exclusive: the rejected, the intimacy seeker, the incompetent, the resentful, and the predatory. The rejected stalkers are usually disgruntled ex-inmates with the highest risk of 4 assaults and with initially high ambivalent motives of reconciliation and revenge. That sounds like the stalker that was for Lauren. He was on parole. He was a felon sex offender. She broke up with him, and there you go. The resentful and predatory stalkers also carry a high risk of violence. They're often sadistic predatory stalkers, prepares for a violent and or sexual attack onto the victim. The intimacy seekers are the most persistent of all stalkers in this stalking type, at times stalking for years or even decades. Could you imagine being stalked by someone for years or decades? How is that legal? How is that allowed in society? That's not free. And that person who's being stalked for those years is, oh my gosh, what a brave soul. I don't know if I would be able to live for that long, being stalked like that, and no one's helping you. It's a living hell. And this is another one that I like, but I'm just going to touch on it. It's not really stalking if you know the person. This is the one I was thinking of. Measuring community attitudes that normalize, justify, and minimize stalking. Just the attitudes of minimizing, justifying, and normalizing stalking exist in the community, influencing whether or not stalking is recognized and potentially affecting the response of police and others to whom victims turn for support. This study investigates the nature of these attitudes as measuring using the stalking related attitudes questionnaire, the SRAQ. 244 community members and 280 police officers in the sample. And look at this. Stalking isn't serious. Stalking is romantic, and victims are to blame. Those are the questions that they asked the people in the community and police officers. And the stronger stereotype endorsement was related to judgments of not guilty in a fictional stalking case. And downplay excuses normalizing stalking behavior can be measured. So that was is this the case study one? No, this one is an actual study. And here's the other one. So this I'm just going to touch because this study looks into stalked and then homicide shortly after, which is what we went into. And let me go back or go forward. Here it is. So this is the discussion. They did some case studies, and some of them were really similar, kind of similar to what happened here. But I wanted to highlight that in case the victim was an acquaintance, which is what Jennifer did say, whom the stalker became obsessed with, the attack itself is typically close range, confrontational, and witnessed by others, and the perpetrator often remains at the scene. And when knives are used, it's especially at the head and chest are the most frequently targeted. So I'm thinking that possibly the FBI is there putting their insight on this case because of it being a sexual homicide of some sorts that was sexually motivated. Let's go into the next video. So this is on the 21st.
We are following new developments in that unsolved murder case of 4 University of Idaho students. It now appears a previously unknown person was on the lease for that off-campus home where the murders happened nearly 3 weeks ago. Police say that person was not at the home on the night of the murders. It has been nearly 3 weeks this weekend since Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Kaylee Gonsalves were killed, and police still do not have a suspect in custody. Former FBI Special Agent Stuart Kaplan joining us once again. He's been with us since the start of this case, breaking down the evidence, the details, and what we know based on what police have released publicly. Thanks for being back again this morning. I think let's start with what we've learned overnight and this possible 6th person on the lease. How critical is that in terms of evidence, police questioning?
Well, it's a little confusing because you would think that by interviewing the surviving roommates that they would have identified that there was some other person who also resided or who at least was legally responsible with respect to being on a lease. So that's somewhat confusing, and I think it's going towards some of the erosion of confidence that this police department, this local police department, is now getting the backlash from. But let me just interject for you this morning that I think will be very pivotal and very telling. These unfortunate murders took place on November 13th. Generally speaking, toxicology reports with respect to the victims generally should come back within 4 to 6 weeks. And so we're close, we're coming upon that 4th week. And I think that the toxicology reports in connection with these 4 victims will be very telling with respect to, I have no doubt, or I will make an assumption that there will be evidence of alcohol in their system. But if in fact there is other substances that are identified and detected in these or any of these victims, I think that may start to zero in on some other potential targets in this investigation.
I hear what you're.
All right, I wanted to stop there because he brought up the toxicology reports. And let's go listen to our friend, Kathy.
Between the time of death and when police.
So it's up all the way.
Found them, approximately.
No, I don't know for sure.
Do we have like any, like, could it have been hours? Could it have been a day? Was it maybe close? Like, is there any sort of like time frame there?
Not that I'm aware of.
When you said the scene was really difficult, I mean, is this something you've had to deal with before in Moscow?
Since I've been coroner, there have been at least 2 other multiple homicide scenes that I've been involved in. So.
Would you say this is probably the most gruesome?
Oh, it's hard to just single it out. It's the only one I've been to where there have been 4 people at one scene. There have been the other ones have had multiple scenes.
And was anybody else injured, like any non-deceased people?
Not that I'm aware of, but I wouldn't necessarily be notified either.
Okay. I didn't know if that was like, because the injuries could be similar, matter to you.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Were the deceased all in close proximity to each other, or were they in different rooms?
I don't know that I can discuss that.
So he's talking about the proximity, if they're close by, because that would be telling. And I thought I had on the right spot. I apologize for that.
I believe this could be like a murder-suicide or...
No, there are 4 homicides.
And when it comes to doing the investigation post-autopsy, that falls on you, correct?
Yes. It's my job to determine the manner and mechanism of death.
And then I know with toxicology results, there can often be, at least in Washington, a delay. So do you have any idea how long it could take, if those were relevant, to get any type of results back on that?
Well, the toxicology reports, right, they usually take 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer.
Here you go.
But they might, I don't think they're going to be relevant in the actual manner or cause of death.
And do we know how long?
How can she say that? How can you say that? First of all, that's not within her scope to say something like that. That is not in her wheelhouse. And I know she was a registered nurse, or she's got a nursing license. Does that mean she's a practicing nurse? I don't think she's been in a hospital probably since she got her nursing license. Because there are nurses out there that just go straight from nursing to like the Department of Health or some type of a administrative role, and their license is used for that. But to be a practicing RN, that takes work, dedication, and ethic, competency. So I don't want Kathy to give RNs a bad name, or for people to assume that has an RN license, therefore to put her in a generalization of RNs. Please don't do that. Thank you. So what he said, I like to see the toxicology reports and kind of give us some insight maybe of other type of homicides that have happened around that area. And we don't know what happened once they got to their house. Maybe they got drugged. You don't know that. There are so many variables that could have happened once they got home, because we don't know. And at least if you had the toxicology report to give you a clue, an understanding, something that shouldn't be there but is there. For all we know, it could have been slow or fast. So as that former FBI agent said, it would be nice to know what the toxicology report is.
Probably to be patient, and I always give police the benefit of the doubt as they work through a very complicated investigation. But there is a lot of criticism. Local police are taking the charge on this. The FBI is involved. Is this messy police work? Because the heat's on. There's a lot of media there. The community wants answers. They're scared.
So let me be frank. I think it's a lack of experience. Look, this small town in Idaho has never, ever, unfortunately, had to endure what they're enduring right now. And to no fault of the local police department, when that 911 call originally went out, they believed in good faith that someone within the house was unconscious.
If they believed that someone was unconscious in good faith, then why wouldn't they let the EMTs in?
They may have anticipated that it was more of a medical emergency than a crime or.
So if it's a medical emergency, I would like to know if there were EMTs or were they paramedics. I'm thinking because it's a not small university, but that university runs it and they have the hospital there. There may be paramedics there just for the probably for the insurance to have a paramedic on site that's needed. They deal with the unconsciousness because it could be heart related.
Ultimately ending up with an unfortunate, horrible, barbaric crime scene. And so I think that some of what we are suffering from, or some of what is being played out, is just the inexperience of this local police department who originally came upon this.
That's no excuse. That's no excuse. If you are able to do one homicide, and if you do it right, with those measures that you put in, those principles that you've put in, those protocols that you put in, would be able to carry over into the other three. If you have a great foundation, then your foundation, your skill set, the tools that you have in your back pocket will help you manage the other ones. That is not a rationale of why they were overwhelmed. People are overwhelmed in professions all the time. This is why we give them those safety measures for them on their belt, because they have to be prepared. That includes homicides.
Awful scene, and most or all experienced detectives, FBI agents, anybody who's been in this business for a long time will tell you that the initial onset of coming onto a scene like this must be the integrity of this crime scene must be maintained at all costs. Now, with that being said, I cannot fault the local police department with respect to running into this house because they in good faith believed that it was a medical emergency. But let me suggest that once they realized what they had, and they should have immediately backed out of that house. And then I think it would have been more prudent to maybe call the state agencies or the federal agencies to assist them. And I don't think that happened in a timely fashion. And that is unfortunately leading to some of the missteps in this case.
It's not too late, though, right? I mean, we've got state police involved, the FBI is involved. I mean, people who are experienced with gruesome, tragic crime scenes like this, for them to step in and start from scratch, essentially.
That is true to some extent. But the problem is that I will assume because of the barbaric nature of the way these homicides occurred, there is probably significant blood splatter. Not only on the bed sheets, but also on the furniture.
This whole significant blood spatter is driving me up the wall. Driving me up the wall. Because you will see forensic people coming in and out. Maybe one or two are wearing the full on, like the PPE, the personal protective equipment, and also used to maintain the crime scene, but also protect yourself. You see very little of that going in and out. So was it isolated in each room? Was it really just isolated in each room? And was it just isolated in the room and in the bathroom that Payne mentioned for both sets of people? I was notified that the bathroom was there, and I was notified the bathroom was upstairs on the 3rd floor.
Sure, and also on the floor. And if you have individuals that are first responders that are coming into the house and literally going room to room.
Well, the first responders never went in. They never even had a chance to go in for an unconscious person. And in good faith, they really believe there's an unconscious person.
The potential of blood being transferred from one location to the other can potentially impact the integrity of the crime scene and the hypothesis that may be put forth in trying to identify either one perpetrator or several perpetrators. I will believe that what will be very, very telling is the toxicology reports and, of course, any DNA evidence that may have been captured. And generally, because it has been publicized that there may have been some defensive wounds that it may have been identified, that any DNA that may have been captured under fingernails with respect to the perpetrator or perpetrator's DNA will be very telling and very probative in a direction that I believe once these toxicology reports come back, I think you're going to see some progression in moving this case forward.
I want to see if someone interviews this person again to see how he feels that Kathy said that toxicology report doesn't matter. It's not going to be relevant to this case.
Forward.
And hopefully some relief. All of these details are hard for the families to hear and to think about. And as time stretches on, it becomes more difficult. Former FBI Special Agent Stuart Kaplan, as always, thank you. We'll be talking to you again soon. Be sure to tune in Sunday night for a News Nation special report, Idaho murder.
Okay. So definitely seasoned. He knows what he's talking about. And on this one is the 22nd.
More perspective now from former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who is now a CNN senior law enforcement analyst. Andy, we just mentioned we are expecting officials to release more updates at a news conference tomorrow, but it's now been more than a week since the murders, and we really don't have any answers. So what do you make of the lack of details?
Well, John, there's a couple of things that I think are really troubling here. One, of course, is the lack of detail. Now, you would never expect any police agency to share all of the details of a crime of this nature with the public, but you would expect them to tell you some of the basics about how they're doing and what they're thinking, simply to calm fears, to let folks know that they're on the job and they're getting things done. Not only have they not done that, they've actually made statements that are contradictory and cause more confusion than they've helped. So they are definitely behind the power curve here in terms of managing this crisis response with their press outreach. And we're just hoping that that's not indicative of a lack of organization or focus or capability in getting this investigation done.
I like this guy. I like this guy a lot. Straight shooter. Tells it how as it is. Not supportive and trying to give an out and be empathetic, sympathetic, hitting right to the point. Like, you're not organized. Well, you're giving contradictory information, and that is not a good look. It's not a good look at all. And not to be, I support police. I support law enforcement. We'll get into this a little bit with Steve talking about defunding the police. It's almost as if he's been pushed to say that. I don't think people understand what that means. It means allocating the funds that police department get and have a better way of managing it, because there are resources out there that the police can use for certain types of instances that happen in the community that they're not well versed in. And you can't expect them to be. You know, they're trained, but they're not going to get like a 2-3 year degree or 4-year degree to do this. So there are people that work in the police station. They are advocates. So if you have a domestic violence or interpersonal violence type situation going on, the police can call people who work for the police department. They're either in the office or they're on call that will come and help assist them. But they don't do that. And those jobs that they have, at least here in New York State that I know of, they don't pay very well. But you really need that resource. You need to start off on the right foot by having someone like that who is trained and educated in there to come and help the police help with an interpersonal violent type situation. Also, there are mental health services out here, well, in New York State that I know of, that when there is a mental health crisis going on, because there's been instances in New York State where people have died because they were under the influence or they were having some type of a psychotic break and they were not treated humanely about it. So when they say defund the police, that's what it's for, reallocating those funds for those resources for the police. That's what that means. So when I'm sure people are thinking I'm being critical and snarky about it when I agree with this. It's only because how many times do we have to say and see these things going on before something gets done, truly gets done? We had the Lauren case in the University of Utah, who went to the police, who went to the university, nothing was done. She got shot dead by her ex-boyfriend in the school parking lot. And now you have these 4 victims. How many victims do we need to have before something gets done? I think we've got to that point where there's been one too many.
Because in your mind, there are still very real current public safety concerns there?
No question. You have a quadruple homicide. You do not have, by their own admission, they do not have a suspect identified. They don't, presumably, not that we know of anyway, they don't have a communication or any sort of claim of motive or purpose behind that. They don't have a murder weapon recovered yet. So without any of those facts in place, I don't see how they can possibly state with any confidence that there is not a threat to the community. Clearly there is. That threat still out there.
One of the things police have said is they have ruled multiple people out. How useful is that in an investigation to rule people out?
You know, eventually, John, you want to rule people out, but I was struck with how quickly they ruled out a fairly large group of folks who seem to have played key roles in the discovery of this crime. So you have the 2 roommates who were on the premises when the murders were taking place. You have some number of either a friend or some friends who came over to see those roommates the next morning before the 911 call was made. You have the individual who drove the 2 females from the food trucks back to their house right before the homicides took place. And all of those folks have been kind of dismissed as having no involvement. It just seems kind of quick to be writing off folks who were so close to this event. You'd think you'd want to do a pretty substantial, thorough investigation of each one of those people and their networks to ensure that there's absolutely no connection before you go out to the public and say, yeah, we've cleared all these people. But, you know, again, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Andrew McCabe, thank you very much for helping.
Yeah, yay, Andrew. Yay, Andrew. And I just wanted to show this when he was just saying that about clearing. So I want to look for when they say they cleared people. That's the 21st. Online reports of the victims being tied and gagged are not accurate. They're not saying it's not true, but they're saying it's not accurate. And detectives are also aware of a Moscow police incident of the report of deceased animals left on a resident's property. It was determined to be wildlife activity and unrelated to the incident. Excuse me? Here's the skinned dog, unrelated to... This is not a good sign. Not a good sign. And Ann Burgess had said that. Not a good sign. Granted, this is post, but still, not a good sign. And on the night of the incident, officers located a dog at the residence. The dog was unharmed and turned over to animal services and then released to the responsible party on the night of the incident. Is that November 13th? The night of the incident? The officers located a dog at the residence. Granted, it happened at 3 or 4 in the morning. So it's actually the night, the next day, the 13th. I don't like the way that is. During our investigation, on the day of during our investigation of going to the house at 1122 King Road, there was a dog in the residence at the time. And this is the 22nd. This is about the stalker. The autopsies. Any additional tips? At this time in the investigation, detectives do not believe the following are involved in this crime: 2 surviving roommates, mail in the grub truck surveillance video, private party driver who took Kaylee in Madison home on November 13th. The identity of the 911 caller has not been released. Investigators are aware of multiple phone calls from victims, Madison Kaylee to a male. Online reports of the victims being tied and gagged are not accurate. And that any residents in the home for the 911 call is involved in the crime. On the morning of the incident, officers located a dog at the residence. The dog was unharmed and turned over to animal services and then released to a responsible party. And here's the skin dog. 600 tips. Now, about this driver, a lot of people are looking into this driver right now on YouTube, contact true crime people. And in Chronicles of Olivia, they have Steve talk about, actually it was not Chronicles of Olivia, I want to say it's in the interview that's coming up on the 23rd, where he says that actually it's the 29th, excuse me, I'm looking on my board, and he's on GMA, and he speaks out about the sorority driver. So he says that the driver who picked them up was a sorority service that they used. And initially I was thinking sorority service, meaning, and I believe someone else was talking about this, I think Truth and Transparency was talking about this, about the Venmo, how the fraternity brothers do it for each other. Like there's a sober drivers out for that, or they're not drinking for the night, and their job is solely to drive around the brothers to whomever where they need to go, so they're not drinking and driving. I was thinking, is that the same for sorority sisters? Is it the girls that do it for each other? Like the littles do it for the bigs or whatever. And to find out that it was a male and it's a sorority service, I'll be interested to know if anyone knows how the sorority driver service at the University of Idaho works. Because it's a male that picked them up. And I never even heard it was a sorority driver. Steve says it is. And I tend to believe him more than I believe other sources. He speaks with his daughter, and he's got a great relationship with her. And just to hear them, the way they speak with each other with such respect. You're especially going to hear that in Chronicles of Olivia. Like, that family loved each other. That family loved being around each other. They enjoyed each other's company. That shows you what type of a mother and father they are. And he even says, there's been times I lose my temper and I say things I shouldn't say throughout the years. And I'm not proud of it, but, and he has said that Kaylee mentioned that she went on a date with an older man prior to this, and he spoke vulgar to her, and she left. She went away, never saw him again. And that tells you that she respects herself because she was taught to respect herself, and she was supported to respect herself. That's a loving, supportive, healthy relationship. Steve G is not putting a promise ring on his daughter for her to not lose her virginity type thing. Okay. So back to business. So that was the 22nd.
Now let's continue this conversation with former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Burmeister. Mr. Burmeister, thank you for joining us today on Morning in America.
Thank you for having me.
So we understand now that all 4 students were asleep. That means that nobody witnessed this. Is that right?
We don't know that for a fact. There may be individuals out there that may have witnessed this, who have left the scene. There's a lot of things that we do not know at this particular time.
I just mentioned this to Robert. Moscow, Idaho is a pretty small town. It's mainly a college population. I wonder if you're trying to eliminate people, or if you're trying to figure out how big your pool of suspects are. It's got to be a lot smaller than in crimes that have happened in other places.
Well, typically in a small town, most times people know everybody in the town that are going on. There may be cameras that are out there that have captured things. So those are the sorts of individual items that investigators are honing in on. And I suspect at this particular point in time, the investigators have a lot of information already. Some of that information they are not disclosing to the public. And it's not that the reason that they're trying to hide anything. I think it's that they're trying to protect the investigation. And it's a fine balance when anytime you have investigators involved, that they're trying to provide information to the public, yet at the same time preserve the sanctity of that investigation. You may have witnesses that come forward with various statements, and you'll want to immediately cross-check those statements against the facts that you already know. So when you look at the individual material in this case, there are a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of questions, and I understand that the public is frustrated, and that's understandable.
I think the public is probably frustrated, especially if you live in that area, because it just seems like, hey, if this person, and we've been calling him a guy, but it could be a woman, if this person is still out there, then give us more information. We need to know how to protect ourselves.
Exactly.
And I wanted to bring that up because I like how he said it's a relatively small town. I grew up in a small town. And when you grow up in a small town, everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everyone's business. everyone knows what you're going to do before you even know what you're going to do. That's what happens in small towns. So when the police say this is a close, tight-knit community, that tells me that they know what's going on. They know what's going on. They know what's going on. They do. It's such a small town. You have people talking. That's a town where people just sit and talk about other people's business nonstop. They know all, basically, hate to say it like this, they know where all the bodies are buried. They know where all that is going. They know the ins and outs of what's going on in that town. And no one's speaking because they know what's going on. That's my opinion. That's my opinion from growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other. And what happens when you're also in a small town is there's history. There's a lot of history. And when you are these beautiful people who are beautiful inside and out, talented, athletic. I think Ethan's mom said that she found out he played volleyball and he was like a spike person. They had no idea. If there was something to play, he played it, and he was exceptional. So you have 4 exceptional people who are surrounded by a bunch of people who are not as exceptional. You're going to ruffle some feathers. You're going to ruffle up a lot of feathers. You're going to get some haters. And I'm sure they got little inklings that they weren't liked. I'm sure they got inklings that people didn't like them. Hence getting out of the sorority. Hence them finally getting to move back in with each other. Hence Kaylee graduating early to get the heck out of there. She couldn't wait to get the fuck out of there. Because it was a small town where everyone knew everything. They probably couldn't even live the life they wanted to live. Couldn't wait to get out of there. Because it's a small town. And if you grew up in a small town, you can't breathe. It's a fishbowl. And it's not fun. Especially if you are a talented individual that looks like this. Beautiful.
And again, that breeds frustration, and it's a tough decision on the part of law enforcement as far as what they will provide to the public. I think they try to provide as much information to protect the public, but again, preserving the sanctity of that investigation is paramount, because you can let information out that could jeopardize the overall investigation, and at this point, that's something they do not want to do.
The police department there in Idaho had said that it was one of the roommates that was sleeping that was not obviously a victim of this crime that had called 911, but that person, 911 was not the first call that person made, that they had called friends over to say, we think our friend might have passed out. They didn't realize that their friend had died in the night. And now there are folks that want the 911 call released. I wonder if that would be helpful, if that would hurt the investigation, if there is any impact, and there would be a reason not to release that.
Well, that's one of those curious items. People always want to know and hear the actual call itself and allow themselves to make that determination. Again, there might be pieces of information on that 911 call that law enforcement perhaps do not want the public to be aware of, again, to protect the investigation. I'm not trying to protect the police department here, but again, I'm trying to think about the investigation overall. So there may be nuggets of information in that call that people do not necessarily need to know.
All right, that is former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Burmeister. Thank you for joining.
Okay, I just remembered something that this woman had said. And she's a very intelligent, insightful woman. She's a registered nurse, and she worked in hospitals and moved on, and she's in clinical settings till this day. So that is a working RN. She is a real nurse. She had mentioned, she had asked if she had a stalker. She was curious about that. And she asked about their social status. What were their social statuses? I'm curious to know what their social status is. And she wanted to know what their social status was, as if, did they work outside of the university? Did they have jobs? Because that will raise their social status. And all three of them did work in a coffee shop or a restaurant. And I believe they said she worked in a restaurant. And she said, well, I would be curious to know if she was asked to waitress outside of the restaurant. Which I didn't even think of that. So, smart cookie. Let's get back. So that was the 23rd. And before we get into Steve and the family, right here, we're going to listen to Mary Ellen. Now, Mary Ellen knows her shit. I like Mary Ellen.
It has been more than a week since 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in a home near campus, and police have not identified who killed them. 3 of the victims lived at the house where the attack occurred. The 4th was there visiting his girlfriend. Police believe they were targeted. With us now is retired agent and former FBI profiler.
I just noticed this. If other news channels can do that, that'd be great. Please date when you are broadcasting your news.
Campus, and police have not identified who killed them. 3 of the victims lived at the house where the attack occurred. The 4th was there visiting his girlfriend. Police believe they were targeted. With us now is retired agent and former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. She's the director of George Mason.
I don't like when the police say that he was visiting his girlfriend, like he came from out of town. He was just visiting his girlfriend, and he just happened to be there. He was just going for a visit to his girlfriend. Yeah, he lives across the street at Simcoe. He's not visiting. He more than likely stays there more than he does at the house, which could ruffle a lot of feathers of the guys. Just saying.
University's Forensic Science Program. Mary Ellen, it's great to talk to you again, although sadly, tragically, we're always talking to you when something horrific has happened. So when you look at this story, Mary Ellen, what sticks out to you about this case and what investigators are looking for?
Well, there are a couple of things that really stand out to me. And I know investigators said that the victims were targeted, and that's a behavioral term that has a lot of meaning to me. So the question is, how are they making that determination? And were they all equally targeted? And the way that assessment has to be made is to see if any of the victims were treated differently in that crime scene. In other words, if one victim received more injuries or was treated differently after the stabbing occurred. And that usually tells you that that person could have been the focus of the attack. And then
how they were treated after the stabbing occurred.
And that usually tells you that that differently in that crime scene. In other words, if one victim received more injuries or was treated differently after the stabbing occurred. And that usually tells you that that person could have been the focus of the attack. And then secondly,
real quickly, I messed my papers up to do that. All right, we'll go back to Mary. Mary knows what she's talking about. I was going to show on my paper about the sadistic sexual homicide. And also that's another aspect of the FBI. Okay, I guess I could use that. Of the FBI. FBI sexual homicide if at least one of the following characteristics is evident. Tire, lack of tire, exposure, positioning, insertion, substitutive, sadistic fantasies reported by the offender. But they also show their sadistic aspects as well, shown in this, not this particular paper, but another one. So these right here are sometimes done afterwards. This right here is done sometimes after the stabbings. This is done after the stabbings. I just want to bring that up. I don't know why that keeps hiding there.
This offender had to leave a lot of evidence at that crime scene. He was not evidence conscious, and so there will be forensic evidence. For example, it's likely that the offender cut themselves with the knife. After you stab that many times, your hand goes down on the blade and you cut yourself and you leave blood there, and that's DNA evidence. And so that evidence is going to be extremely important. And then finally, just based on going inside somebody else's home in the middle of the night with other people there to commit a quadruple homicide suggests to me that that person has likely been in that home prior to this attack, and that this individual, this offender, has prior experience being in other people's homes.
So, Mary Ellen, I'm wondering about the time frame here. Are there any gaps in the timeline from when the victims...
So with that being said, an acquaintance, Jennifer has said it, and now Mary Ellen has said it. It has to be someone known of the victims. The victims know, they know of the victims, and they have to know of that home. So there is some type of a relationship. Not a PhD student from a different university, that when people see his picture, other students, they have no idea who that person is. It's someone who is known. And if you saw my papers before, and you also just saw right there, even with the stalking, it is someone who is known, and it's an acquaintance.
Were last seen and when they were found dead.
It does seem that there's some gaps because, and that information may not ever be able to be filled in because the victims themselves would be the ones to tell you, we got home at this time and then we went to bed at that time. So I don't know that that will ever be completed, but the question remains, at what point did the offender get inside that house? And were all the victims, they were in their beds is what it sounds like, but were they all asleep? If they were not all equally asleep in a deep sleep, that could also explain some of the defensive injuries on several of the victims, although that's not been clarified. So that timeline is getting narrower and narrower, but I'm not sure it will ever be pinned down 100%.
Mary Ellen, the murder weapon.
It's never going to be pinned down because the coroner didn't do anything since 5:30 in the afternoon. And they didn't make the phone call till 11:58. And the door was wide open. And that affects the decomp of the body.
What kind of murder weapon, what are you hearing about what could have been used? I just keep thinking that it's such a brutal attack. To use an object to murder, 4 people, I'm trying to understand. It's just impossible to understand because doesn't it strike you, Mary Ellen, and you're the expert here, that this would be of an extreme personal nature to use a weapon like that, an object like that, to murder 4 people, as opposed to a gun, which we've covered these mass shootings, and oftentimes the perpetrators don't know any of the victims, at least in the last couple of weeks, the ones that we've been reporting on. What does that tell you?
Well, when an offender uses a knife, they have to get close up and personal with the victim. And that means that they can see their face, they interact with them, especially if the victim is fighting back, and they see the victim slowly losing their life. Here's what I'd also say about this knife. It had to be a pretty sturdy knife because it survived the stabbing of 4 people multiple times. Now, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, they traditionally don't say, well, the weapon used here was exactly this. They can tell you elements of the instrument, but in my experience, they don't traditionally say it is exactly this, especially if you're dealing with a sharp-bladed instrument. But I'd also say that this offender, even though sloppy in the crime scene, leaving so much evidence, he was very efficient with this knife. He was able to complete 4 homicides and then leave the scene. That tells me this person has experience with that knife, a very effective cutting instrument, and that whether or not he would then or she would then throw that instrument away in the woods someplace is doubtful to me, because this is an instrument that's important to that offender. And I do think, based on the efficiency of those homicides, that the knife has been used before, not necessarily in another murder, but that the offender has used it before in other instances.
It's absolutely chilling, Mary Ellen, to hear you talk about that and efficiency when we're talking about the taking of human lives.
That's my dog Joe, if you hear him.
Based on what we know so far, what type of person or potentially group of people is most likely to commit an act like this?
Based on what I know so far, and again, that's coming from the media, this kind of violence is indicative of what we call instrumental violence, which is different from the traditional violence called reactive violence. Reactive violence is, if I punch you in the nose and you punch me back, that's reactive violence. But this instrumental violence is violence that is cold-blooded, it's predatory, and it's very callous type of violence perpetrated frequently on strangers. And this type of violence is oftentimes the kind of violence that we seek used by people that are psychopathic. The old-fashioned term was sociopath.
So she said strangers there.
It's oftentimes the kind of violence that we seek used by people that are psychopathic. The old-fashioned... That's reactive violence. But this instrumental violence is violence that is cold-blooded, it's predatory, and it's very callous type of violence perpetrated frequently on strangers. And this type of violence is oftentimes the kind of violence that we seek used by people that are psychopathic. The old-fashioned term was sociopath. But psychopathic individuals, not mentally ill, so I want to make that clear right away, but they are people who are profoundly lacking in empathy and guilt for their behavior. And when they do commit crimes, their crimes have a very high-risk element to it because they enjoy the thrill of whatever the crime is. If it's killing people, they enjoy having it be even more high risk than it needs to be. And this was a very high-risk crime. When you go into somebody's home in the middle of the night and kill them, that's very high risk.
Do you believe that there's a threat to...
Okay, so she says it's high risk. Our smart cookie over here says it's relatively low risk. She says that because they're asleep, so that's low risk. They're not going to be as able or be on alert. They're very vulnerable. They're sleeping, or they're in their room ready to go to sleep, or they're in their house ready to wind down. So they are at a high risk of being vulnerable, but it's a low risk for the perpetrator. And it is, I want to say she said it was also a relatively low risk as well, because he was going into the home where it was dark, so no one could see him. It's high risk for him to go into that home if he is a stranger. If he is a stranger, like Mary Ellen's saying, it is high risk for him. But the way that he was able to move through that home doesn't sound like he is that much of a stranger. And that's kind of that stalking and cataclysmic that is here. The attack itself is typically close range. More than half of all murder victims are either acquaintances, friends, or relatives of the offender, and 1/3 of the femicides are committed by husbands or boyfriends. This is the Bureau of Investigations, 1999. The actual incidence of homicide among stalkers is unclear, but is probably more frequent than initially believed. The typical victim of the homicidal stalker, as well as the victim of a non-homicidal aggressive stalker, is usually a former intimate partner. However, there have been some reported cases of stalking homicide in which no such prior relationship existed. In some of these cases, the victim was a celebrity. In other cases, the victim was an acquaintance whom the stalker became obsessed with. But despite the proliferation of research on stalking over the past 10 years, the stalker who kills has been rarely studied and remains poorly understood. And here they're saying the attack itself is typically close range, confrontational, and witnessed by others, and the perpetrator often remains at the scene. So there was, Mary Ellen was saying, it would be interesting to know how the bodies were, how the stabbings were done, who got the worst of the stabbings, and or what was done to the body post the stabbing, because the perpetrator often remains at the scene. Firearms and knives are most often used, and the vital organs, especially the head and chest, are most frequently targeted. In many cases, the offender may have told others that he had a relationship with the victim and invented stories to bolster this claim. And here's a person they did a case study on, and then he says, I thought about her all the time. I couldn't get her out of my head. He felt enraged when he got her letter of rejection. However, he had already developed homicidal ideas. I don't know where the thoughts came from for about 2 weeks before. Okay. So it's still up in the air, but it's definitely an acquaintance, or it could be a stranger. A stranger in that he's an acquaintance, like he's in the outskirts. He's an acquaintance. Let me just make sure I'm reading that correctly before I start talking. Former intimate partner. There have been reported cases of stalker homicide in which no such prior relationship existed. In some cases, the victim was a celebrity. Okay. In other cases, okay, that's the stranger stalker is like a celebrity. In other cases, the victim was an acquaintance whom the stalker became obsessed with. And the reason I'm thinking that is because of what this smart cookie said. And her social status. Did she waitress or was a server at outside parties? And the way this beautiful, smart, charismatic woman working at these parties, she's at a high risk for just being who she is. Because there's people around her that can't handle themselves as a human being. And they are allowed to act that way. They're allowed to act that way. If you didn't see my one video with the amount of sex offenders in Moscow, in a university town, and it had a little disclaimer that not all of them are on there because not all of them have addresses, but they do work there. And if you look at any of the police reports that people are looking into, there is a lot going on in that town. So much so that apparently the police department cannot handle. They're worried about noise complaints. They're more worried about noise complaints and underage drinking than actually doing the work. Doing the work. Because if you do the work properly, things don't escalate to this. This is where this is what makes my blood boil, because I'm a professional at what I do. I go in and I have integrity in my work and I do my job. And what comes with that, unfortunately, is you get people around you who don't do a job, who don't really do, they do the bare minimum. They do bupkis. And they do bupkis because they know people like me will clean up their shit. And they know that eventually someone else like me will clean it up. And they know that we're always so short-staffed with everywhere we are nowadays, just the way it is. They're going to be kept. And they're going to just sit around and do nothing. And then people like me have to trail behind them and clean up after them. And it's usually when it's got to the point where it's escalated, where now I have to really hone in and fucking take care of shit because of lazy ass fucking people who don't do their job and they're getting paid. We're all getting paid. We're all at work. Do your work. Mary Ellen does her work.
The community?
I do. Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why I think that. If somebody has the capability of doing this, these wounds going into that home, these injuries, these wounds were not an effort to scare the victims or to threaten the victims. They were intended to kill the victims. And if an offender has this capability, even though maybe one or two of the victims were targeted and the others were not, but were still killed, this offender, because of that behavior, that high-risk impulsive type of behavior, is capable of repeating it again in the right set of circumstances. So based on that, I would say that this is he or she or they are at high risk for reoffending.
So deeply disturbing to hear your assessment, but important, right, in the absence of any additional public information at this point as people try to understand what happened there. Mary Ellen O'Toole, Mary Ellen, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
How you guys doing?
Oh, play the next one. There you go.
Me? It's not real yet. I'm a bit in denial. I'm hoping for justice. That's why I'm trying to switch myself into that mode to try to find some justice. That's where I'm at.
I get it. Steve, Olivia?
Yeah, I just know my sister, she was a hard worker.
Look at Olivia.
And,
poor thing.
Just sitting in my bed and crying myself to sleep isn't going to do her any justice. And that's not what she'd want me to do. She'd want me to stay active and doing what I can to spread her message and hope that we can find this suspect or suspects. And that's how I feel.
I get it. I get it. She's got a great smile. We keep showing that picture. I know your family's been frustrated with the investigation so far, understandably so. Here we are, a week and a half out, and really not much information about this. Does not appear to be a suspect. Tell me, Olivia, what specifically you've been frustrated with, because you did your own work here. For instance, you found video of the food truck, for example, where two of the victims were seen the same night as this killing.
Yeah, I would say, I think that obviously this is extremely personal for us, and we treated it that way from the very get-go. I know how valuable those first 48, 72 hours are. And I can only hope that the police also know how valuable that is, and that they have a lot of information there that just isn't public right now. I will say the one lingering frustration I have is the timeline. I know it's semantics, but my sisters got home at 1:56. It wasn't 1:45. I know it might not seem significant, but when we're looking for camera, when we're looking for dash footage, when we're looking for any of those things, I do feel it is valuable, and they did get home at 1:56. It was not 1:45.
Right. There's one detail there. Kaylee's mother has said she believes that the suspect, the killer, is someone Kaylee knew very well, and that the killer might even be at the vigil. Remarkable. I wonder, Steve, do you share that view?
It's speculation. My daughter was very popular. It seemed like everyone that I talked to said she knew everyone. They had parties. They were college kids. They were about to graduate. Yeah. So somebody could have partied in the house and got an idea or got the confidence to pull that off.
I kind of like how so your wife said this. Steve, do you think this as well? Like, what the hell?
Steve, this question of the stalker, and I'm very conscious with this story of how many rumors have been circulating, and a lot of those rumors turn out to not be true. But Stephen, this discussion of the possibility she may have had a stalker, have police been able to stand that up, or not? They seem to be knocking that down.
Yeah, it seems to be knocked down. Obviously, any of that information would be new to us as well. Kaylee FaceTimed me.
Doesn't seem like her brother likes that very much.
She didn't call or text. She FaceTimed me.
But
for
I don't want
literally
to speculate
hours,
on
almost
that.
every single day, and she was extremely cautious. She was very vigilant. I think that she really would have noticed something, and she would have said it to us. She wasn't, scared to get us involved in her life in any capacity like that.
I know you're frustrated with how much and how information, developments in the investigation are being shared with the public. Are they sharing anything with you that they're not sharing publicly, in light of the fact that this was your sister, this was your daughter?
I'm not getting anything. They're not sharing much with me. I know that there's a separation in duties there. They do have the FBI now, so I don't know how much the individuals that I'm talking with, which are the local, are actually exercising their different jurisdictions. I think they might not know a lot because, they have briefings, and if they haven't had a briefing, they probably don't know exactly what's going on.
Are they contacting you at all? Are they keeping you updated more than they are, say, on the website or with these press briefings?
To be honest, they're not. I mean, yesterday I asked about the stalker question and they couldn't confirm anything. And then today I hear that they're reaching out to the community saying that there's a stalker involved. So I don't know what to make of that.
It's
a
lot of
sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Purposely, they're just so vague with everything that they say, and then they slowly peel it back layer until you find the real story. It all started with a sharp-edged weapon. What was the use in telling the community that a sharp-edged weapon was used instead of just coming out and telling us that it was a knife from the beginning? I don't understand the purposeness of being so vague. You're not holding the integrity of the case together by not telling anybody anything.
I understand you have frustrations for how police and investigators have handled the crime scene. What are those frustrations specifically?
Well, they expanded it, and there was volunteers that walked around, and they disclosed that they were looking and found different things. So, they did share with me that may have more to do with keeping cameras out than it actually does with evidence gathering. So I hope that is indeed the case, because it would be pretty disheartening a week later to know that they didn't have the right crimes.
One of the
So they had volunteers helping and they were not at the right crime scene. So right now, and with no help of CNN, they're almost pinning them against the police. So you're not happy what they're doing. They're not telling you this. So what's going on? Why aren't you happy with them? So they're almost pinning them against the investigation. And, Steve aired out a little dirty laundry, which I think is needed, because you have to know how the investigation's going. Are they being diligent? Are they being organized? Because now it is the 23rd, so it's 10 days later. I've never been in an active investigation, but I've worked at different job sites, career sites, and I have my basic understanding of how to do my position. So when I go to a new place, I have my foundational skills of the who, what, when, how, and why, and I find out who I can talk to, who can I look for help, where do I get my things, where are the phone numbers, where is this? You get yourself situated and grounded. So now it's 10 days out. So you would think with 10 days in, you have people knowing their active role. If there needs to be some type of active roles, specific roles, and working as a team, collaborating. 10 days out, I think, is a good amount of time to get that going, personally. I've never worked a crime scene before, but I've worked in high pressure, life and death situations. So therefore, you need to have your shit ready, on go, whether you like it or not, because it can happen at any moment.
Mother of one of the surviving roommates, so reminding our viewers, there were 2 roommates who were upstairs and survived this, told a reporter that those roommates heard something that night. Have you been told? Have you heard from sharing with other relatives of the other victims what that was exactly?
No, I would say for us that we did hear those rumors, but right now we can only leave it at that. None of that has ever been confirmed to us.
We have not spoke with the roommates.
Yeah.
The surviving roommates, and they were downstairs, just to clarify that for you, sir.
Okay, downstairs, right, on a different floor from where it appears where the murders took place. One consistent thing, and granted there's been some changes, as you note, in how the police have described this. One consistent descriptor has been that the attack was targeted. Do you know if police believe one person in the house was the target of this attack, or all 4?
I've been told it's one, but then again, there's the vagueness. Like, it's like purposely vague, I'm hoping, but it confuses everyone.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows what that really means, other than maybe somebody had a different kind of attack footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I feel like we just want some more. We all want to play a part in helping, and we can't play a part if we don't have any real substantial information to work from.
Yeah, I get it. You want to help. I mean, Olivia, you found video that has been helpful in this investigation. I'm sure you do want to help. Has anyone indicated to you that if it was indeed one person targeted, was Kaylee the target? Has anybody shared that with you?
They won't confirm who that was to us.
The police, that is.
We've heard the rumors that that's the case, but it's just a rumor at this point.
Tons and tons of rumors, but nothing from the police.
And I'll say I think a lot of those rumors do stem from all of the vagueness, and it's human nature to want answers. It's human nature to kind of put forth a theory so that you can even comprehend it in your brain. And so I think that's how we're getting all of some of these really, really off the wall theories, and some of these theories like Kaylee had a stalker, that even we're sitting here scratching our heads saying, no, it couldn't be. If it was, it would be news to us.
Yeah.
I am sure it is frustrating. Your family has been very outspoken in support of Jack. He's Kaylee's ex-boyfriend.
And with the stalker, as she said, she's, with this whole stalker information, we don't know. We would have known if she did. We would have known if she had one or not. We talked to her. But there is an element where people may not even know they're being stalked. It happens quite frequently when they're in the moment with an acquaintance that they're being stalked. And it's people who stalk are pretty systematic with it. And they're very sly and sneaky with it as well. I don't have the paper in front of me, but if you want me to look for it and do a little quick overview with it, please let me know in the comments. But there was a study that I read that a lot of people don't know that they're being stalked, and then this happens. And then there's instances where they are being stalked, like, very short period, and then boom, it just happens. The homicide happens. And that's the cataclysmic. That's the stalking, but that was mostly with interpersonal, but there was stranger, if you remember, but it was mostly acquaintance, and it escalated quickly. So it could have been a stalker that Kaylee didn't even really know or knew of and didn't think anything of it because she knew of this person. And when you think about stalker, you think stranger, but strangers really don't stalk you. They're people that you know. They're acquaintances. They're people around you in your circle. And if she worked out in the community, people would see her. She'll be exposed to the public more.
And on the Moscow police website, though, he is not listed, notably, as someone who has been cleared in the investigation. To your knowledge, is that significant?
No, I don't personally think so, because I think that there's the entire rest of the world that's also not on that list of people who have been cleared,
right?
Including Maddie's boyfriend, including any associates of Xana or Ethan that might not be involved. I don't find that significant at all.
And there were a number of phone calls to him that night, and you say that would have been typical behavior for Kaylee, that she often would call friends, folks, you know, for a whole bunch of things.
At any time, yeah. Multiple times until I would pick up at 3 a.m. and be like, Kaylee, what? You know?
Yeah.
And some of the last footage of her at that food court, she's on her phone 24/7 filming the whole thing. So she lived on that phone. So
yeah. It sounds like you're saying that the delays here in sharing information, the delays in, well, frankly, making more progress on the investigation, mean the police have lost their best opportunity, right? I think, Olivia, you were saying that those early hours and days are key. That's when you can make real progress. Do you believe that they've missed their best chance here, or may have?
Not only is that's just not a matter of opinion, that's a matter of fact. If you look statistically at homicide cases, those first 10 days are so incredibly important in finding a suspect.
Listen to the family talk. They know their shit. They're smart. They're intelligent. Kaylee is smart and intelligent. And believe it or not, people who are smart and intelligent are targeted. If you work in a place and you are smart and intelligent, no one likes you. You're targeted. You're sometimes targeted to the point where a group of them will come after you to make your life a living hell so that you leave. Has anyone ever experienced that? Being a smart, talented person at your work, and you're not trying to show off, so to speak. You're just doing your job. You're just doing you. You're just doing you. You're being you. You're in your element, and you're working. Because that's what you do. That's who you are. And you mind your own business. You'll say hi to everyone, but you don't get into the gossip. And you do your work. And people do not like you because of that, because you make them look bad. So instead of them doing better, they target you. So here we have smart, intelligent, critical thinking individuals in the family. You see how they all talk and they all respect what each other is saying. They're all next to each other in a tight space. They all feel comfortable being with each other. Not comfortable in the situation, but around each other. They're nodding their heads, agreeing with each other. Not agreeing, and she's like, well, in my opinion, this is what I think. And they're like, okay. They respect each other. That is a family that not many people are going to like. Because they don't have that. They wish they did. But I think this family worked on being who they are. Because being a smart, talented person, some of it is natural ability, but you also have to work at it too. It's not something you rest on. If you are smart, you got to still be smart and keep going on. And like he said in Chronicles Olivia, it wasn't about the celebration. It's about finding your groove, doing accomplishments, and keep it moving and keep accomplishing. That's how they motivate. That's their motivation in life, is to be accomplished. And people don't like that.
We determine almost 9 out of 10 times, I believe.
Let me correct myself. Average people don't like that. Below average people don't like that. But you can always do better. It takes work. Use your brain. Use your ears.
It was, if you find a suspect. So yeah, that's not very encouraging to hear that they want to cast this wide net of suspects now. And people we know have no involvement.
And this is back to Jennifer. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to stop there, and we're going to keep going, but the reason why I stopped there is because now, going forward from there, you're going to see the conversation of how the FBI talk about Steve. And Steve and his family don't speak out again until the 28th. Okay, and that's at GMA. And that's what, if you remember that one, he gets a little bit heated. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at my board is not in chronological order, and it's messing me up. The next one is 27th. So the 27th, he speaks out on Fox, and he talks about the timeline, the alibis. He's getting frustrated. And then we have FBI from the 28th out. And you have some FBI agents who are talking about the attack, but they're also talking about how Steve is handling the investigation, how Steve's almost impeding on the investigation. And that brings us up to, I go up to December 8th, and I purposefully go up to December 8th. Here, let me get this off. I'm turned around from this screen because I'm looking at my board, so you can look at something a little bit other than that newscaster. So, and this was posted on the 9th. December 8th is when they come out with the car. The 2011-2013 Honda Elantra. They're looking for that Elantra because there are occupants inside of there that will help with the investigation. They want to interview them because they have some key information about the 1122 King Road on 1113. And then this is the 9th. And this, so when I first watched this, I want to say I watched it relatively around the time this was published, or this was put on YouTube. Probably like the 10th or 11th, fairly close. And at the time when I heard this guy speaking, I was thinking, holy shit, what's going on with this case? Because the way he talks about Steve, and I'm going to wait and you'll see. And when I did my video on the intro of a Mindhunter on my channel, I got to hear it again. And I was mostly looking for these two because they're the resource, they're the intellects, they're still working. He's still practicing as a psychologist, and she just wrote a book, and she still works at a university. They both still work at universities to this day. So I wasn't really paying attention to what he was saying, but when these two would talk, it interfered with what they were saying, in my opinion, because I want the information. I want the details. I want the clinics. I want the methods. I want to hear professional, working, intelligent people give their insights. And when I am not hearing that, because they have these two talking about he's talking for a former FBI agent, and he's great. I'm not trying to dog him. He's a good guy. It was kind of awkward though that he compared his mom to her, which was really weird. But what he was saying really blew my mind. I'm like, are they really talking about the father like this? And when they brought that up with the father, he did. These two totally were just like, what the fuck you talking about, dude? What are you saying? Like, I'm not gonna step in that shit, because that's shit. I'm not even gonna go there. Like, we are professionals and we are intelligent. We don't go in the mud. That's not what we do. If they worked in an office, like a typical office, they would get ran out by the people. they would get run out by the people. They would be targeted and ran out of a place. And it was funny watching this, and we'll see it, how he brought that up and they kind of put him in his place. And mostly Gary did, but even Ann did. And I think when she did it, he kind of like backtracked big time. He was like, oh, well, yeah, I agree with you. So I want to say it's because of this interview of the G's. I'm going to call them the G's because they call themselves the G's. So I'm going to call them G's too. I want to say a lot of it stems from this video because they aired out some dirty laundry of the MPD. Very concerning dirty laundry. And no one's talking to them. They're in the dark. And you would think all of that consulting money that they were getting, the MPD, that some of that money and part of their PR, you would think, would be strictly for the family. We have a designated person who just speaks with the family. We give them daily updates of whatever. We got certain tips in. We got a couple phone calls in. We're looking into this aspect of an acquaintance or a friend. We did some more interviews around the homes, and we were able to get a little bit more information with the cameras. We haven't really got into it yet. Right now we're looking into the phones. Just something. Just let me know that you're working the case. I don't want some big nuggets of details. Personally, if this was me, this is what I would want to hear. I want to hear that you're working the case every single day. Give me an update of some sort. It could be like 2 minutes. Hey, how are you? What's going on? Thank you for calling. So today we actually got in several more tips last night. We have so-and-so department looking into them. They're going to look into that information and kind of follow through with that. And then we got a couple more phone calls last night regarding this. I don't want to say too much, but and then information may lead us in this direction of speaking to these people on these interviews that we're going to do. You don't have to name names. Something of that nature, something of that point. That's what I would want. That would make me feel comfortable that you're doing your job, you're working the case, and you're making progress. But if you're not calling, then that tells me you're hiding. That tells me you're avoiding. That tells me that you don't want to say anything because you're not prepared to answer any questions that they're going to have because they are smart, intelligent people. So they're not about the bullshit. They are not about the bullshit at all. So if your department is about the bullshit, the majority are, they're going to be avoiding them because they don't know how to be authentic and real and know what they're doing. And that's why I wanted to show when I started doing these videos, this is why, and I know they're boring and they're not fun. It's not, razzle dazzle, but it's very informative and it's needed. So that's why before I started really talking as I am doing now, because I wanted to prepare myself and to be able to back myself up. So when I hear them saying things as I've shown, this is what she's saying, and this correlates with this. I back myself up by getting myself versed, preparing before I open my mouth. That's how I function. That's how I do it. You are more than welcome to do that. I mean, it's reading, it's preparing, it's preparedness so that you're able to, like these two people are prepared. These two people are prepared. This person came in last minute and he came with mud to sling, in my opinion, and you'll hear him. He contributed a little bit because he was involved more in gang related crimes, so he has some experience, but he really didn't bring much to the table. As of Jen did a little, and Mary Ellen, in my opinion, was the home run.
It has been
She
more
was
than a week since
on the
four
home
University
team.
of Idaho students were found.
She brought it, and she had her fur. She brought it with her fur. Mary Ellen brought it. She looked pretty sad. I'm sure she was upset about what she was learning, and she had to talk about it. I mean, it chokes me up too when I read the papers when I'm learning about this, and as I'm reading them and I'm hearing the G's talk about the clothing, and then I'm reading the affidavit of how it was handled, and it boils my blood. It pisses me off. Because, as I said, these individuals were, in my opinion, and they may not have been feeling it at the time, which is understandable. These individuals were killing it in life. They were doing great. They were finding their groove. Zana, Maddie, Kaylee. They were finding their groove. Was it perfect? No, it's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be perfect. Whoever told you that is delusional. Life is not perfect. It's not supposed to be. You're supposed to have peaks and valleys, ups and downs. That's what makes it life. You ever play that Game of Life? I always got the car with all the damn kids. Every single time. Every single time. Which is what I don't want. But they were doing great in life. And you see that, and it pisses me off. I get mama bear mode. I become mama bear when I see injustice going on. It boils my blood. And the only way I know how to help is the papers. See, I'm getting a little emotional about it. Is the papers. Because I live in a town. It's a small town. Well, it's a suburb just outside of the city. It's just it's like a drive, not very far, which is what I like. It's not too suburby, but enough away that I can just go into the city. And I think to myself, if this happened in my location, would my police department be prepared? Probably not. Probably not. And the only way I know how to help in this situation is just do these papers and just learn what it means to have a stalker, what it means to be stalked, what it means that there are sexual homicides that go on, and what that entails. And look how outdated this is. And we have this great source, YouTube, and and editing tools to help us communicate a little bit better. And I'm not great with computers. I've had to learn how to use computers once I started doing this channel. I laugh that I say this because I never thought I would have 4 subscribers. Woo woo. And that I would be doing this on my free time. But what else will I be doing on my free time? Sit around watching TV, which I love to do, but I was never really into technology that way. I'm a cusper. I was born at the end of one generation and too soon into another. So born towards the end and too soon into another. And we started with the computer age. And I remember working and they're saying, well, we're trying this new thing called email and you can use it or you don't have to. And we're just trying to figure it out and see if it's going to be helpful. And I'm like, okay. So I chose not to email. And then a few months later, I get a notice from my manager saying, but did you get the email? I was like, hell no, I didn't get no email. You said if it was a choice. I chose not to touch it, and I have not touched it at all. So I've had to learn a new skill set, which is computers in an artsy fartsy type of way. So that's November 23rd. And this, I'm going to show how it kind of changes the tone of former FBIs when they're talking about the case. And then we see the tone change for Steve as well. So we're seeing how Steve is dealing with this case, how it's being handled. And we're going to hear how the FBI feels about Steve, letting us know how he feels, how this case is going. Okay, so moving forward. All right, so as you see my little timer here, it's been 2 hours and 14 minutes. So that's a long time. I didn't realize it would take this long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and end that here and split them up. And I'm going to go ahead and do the 23rd and on and up to the December 9th. So 23rd through December 9th. And we'll see if that ends up being, we'll see how long that takes. Because I don't want these to be too long. And I did a lot of talking in that one. I try to be as objective as I could. But I also have my opinions. And let me know in the comments if you like what you're hearing, if you don't like what you're hearing. Just let me know. Just my 4 subscribers, let me know how I'm doing. Let me know what you think. And I look forward to hearing from you. And I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And I'm going to edit it just a little bit. I'm not going to edit too much out of it because I want it to be as authentic and real and honest as possible. I don't want to like take out the ums and ands and do all those things. I'm going to hear it just to make sure with the sound and maybe put some sound in the background, which I like to do because I feel like it gives a better feel to it. Then I will upload it into YouTube, and I have those videos already for the 23rd onwards with the former FBI and Stephen. And I'm going to look into more about how I have this cut up, but I'm going to go ahead and once I see the 23rd on through the 23rd through December 8th, I'm going to hear the tone of that, and then I'm going to show, but I'm definitely going to show this more than these two, because those two I did already in my two videos that I had. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, hit the notification, hit the like. Until next time.